I'd get erections and I'd pull my pants down and pee along straight lines. I thought they were for peeing long distances. What happened to you when you were young that you didn't understand until years later? Oh man, it's so good to see you, my beautiful viewer. So glad you can join us once again for another story time. Since you're here, can you do me a favor and hit the like button for the algorithm? This also shows YouTube that you enjoy spending time with your favorite storyteller, Andrew. If you do, I'll kindly release the corona vaccine. Let's get this show on the road and start the stories. My mom told me my goldfish ran away. Defending my mom from my dad since he slapped her butt cheek in the laundry room. When I was like 6. And I was supposed to be away with my grandparents. I was the hero, the cockbloking hero. Didn't really happen to me, but when I was 14 I suddenly realized that those 2 giraffes at the zoo when I was 7 that I shouted about to everyone else weren't giving each other piggybacks. When I was about 7 or 8 I was at a train station with my parents and saw a guy on the opposite platform jump in front of an oncoming train. At the time I didn't really get what was going on and was just really curious to look, but now I understand why we left the station in a hurry. When I was 6 we used to play a lot with Pokemon cards at school. One recess I left my deck inside the classroom. When I came back my Charizard was missing from it. 3 days later a friend from class came to me and told me he found my Charizard outside in a bush. Took me 10 years to realize he stole it from me and then got cold feet and gave it back. I was in law at the age of 10 and ended up with sunburn as I am English and not used to the heat. My dad took me to the restroom where we shared a stall and he helped me take my t-shirt off so that he could reapply after sun. This was pretty painful. I was screaming inside a locked stall, saying that it hurt, so I was surprised when a burly guy forced open the door, looking quite annoyed at my dad, who explained correctly what was happening. I grimaced through the pain and agreed as best as possible. Only years later that I realized that burly guy was a top bloke and that the pain he was trying to save me from wasn't that kind of chafing. I'm a redhead, but neither of my parents or my brother is a redhead. So when we were out in public when I was young, a lot of people would ask where my red hair came from. One day, when I was probably 6 or so, my parents told me to start answering the question with "from the mailman," which I did constantly because people always seemed to react to it. It wasn't till I got to high school that it clicked that the mailman in this scenario had not delivered my red hair in an envelope, but that it had come from a much different package. Sometimes we would stop at my aunt's work so that my dad could go in and talk to her. I wasn't allowed in because I was a kid and it was an adult place. The only other things that ever got the descriptor adult were adult films, which were not for kids because of all the sex. So I happily assumed that my aunt worked someplace where all sorts of sex was happening. Years later, I was driving by and noticed that it was a retirement home. I lost one of my teeth when I was 7 years old, and so I was so excited to get money and stuff from the tooth fairy. I put the tooth under the pillow, and I was ready to get my prize for losing a tooth. The next morning, I woke up and the tooth was gone but no present. I went and told my dad about how I just got scammed from the tooth fairy, and he was like, "Oh the tooth fairy had to run fast, so she gave me the money to give to you." He then pulls out his wallet and gives me the $2 that the tooth fairy gave him. I was so happy but still wondered why the tooth fairy was in such a rush. I was about 5 to 6 years old in a Calder store, defunct discount Sears wannabe store in New England. My mom and I were on the second floor, and I was a couple of steps behind her. I thought I saw her go down the escalator, so I did too to catch up. I couldn't find her. I looked around for a while fruitlessly. I was eventually approached by a lady who looked to be about 40 in a brown leather jacket. She asked if I was lost. She said she was a police officer and that my mom was outside. She led me toward the front entrance as my mom called for me from the second floor. I went to my mom. Unless I remembered some details incorrectly, I think I was about to get kidnapped. This fact occurred to me when I was about 20. We had this gym teacher in elementary school that would bring a bag of apples to class and give the girls one if they'd give him a massage. I was pissed because I absolutely loved apples, still do. I thought it was unfair that only the girls got apples, so I told my teacher how Mr. So-and-so would only let the girls massage him for apples and we had to do sports. I was not an athletic child, so the idea of eating apples versus gym activities greatly appealed to me. I had to go to the principal's office to tell them my story, which was basically, "This is bullcrap. Everyone should be getting apples, or no one should be getting apples." Other students corroborated my story, and soon enough so-and-so was gone. Dad used to have a shop in the basement where he would work on things in the evening. He used to smoke while he was down there, and I wasn't allowed to be in the shop because smoke is bad for kids. I used to sneak down covert style sometimes, and he'd catch me and shoo me out. All while laughing and smiling. The smoke smelled different than regular smoke, but I was little and didn't think much of it. Years later, when I first, knowingly, smelled pot, I instantly recognized the smell. Dad used to smoke pot in the basement every night. When I was 12, my divorced mother and I lived in a nice duplex in my hometown. She would go to the city after I fell asleep and party downtown with my aunt almost every night. I didn't know this until I was older. One night in particular, I fell asleep on the couch and halfway woke up to the sound of the front door opening and closing. I saw my mom walk in with a creepy, hooded, shadowy figure close behind her. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I asked my mom who was with her when she came home last night. She looked terribly confused. I told her about the figure behind her, and the color drained out of her face, and she shook her head and told me to stop playing games. That if I kept telling ghost stories I would invite malevolent spirits into the house. Found out like a year ago that she brought a guy home and made me believe it was a ghost, so I wouldn't tell my grandparents. Crafty bitch. In kindergarten I had a best friend named Daniel, and we played with toy dinosaurs and traded them all the time. January comes around and I invite him to my birthday party I was having at my house. He never showed up that day, and my mom told me that day he wasn't going to be able to make it as well, as he wouldn't be able to come to school again. Little kid me was like, okay, I'll see him later. He died in a car crash on the way to my birthday party. Edit. Thank you for your support and kind words. To the people saying, this didn't happen or other rude things. This did happen, and I feel sad every single birthday I have. To the people asking, did I get his gift? I did not. But I still have the last glow-in-the-dark triceratops that he gave me. When I was 6 and my brother was 4, we used to walk to our cousin's house, which was 2 houses down. One evening, we asked our mother if we could go over and she said yes and let us walk over by ourselves. While we're walking, this car drives up to us and asks if we knew where the nearest McDonald's was and if we'd like to come with him. I told him we weren't allowed to eat McDonald's without our mother's permission and turned to get her to ask if we were allowed. She was already running outside to get us when the car sped off. I was around 15 when I was reminiscing with my family and she brought it up. Creepy realization. When I was about 4 or 5 we got 2 very important life-changing bits of medical news. The first was my baby brother was on the way. The second was that my father was diagnosed with acute lymphoma and had about 2 weeks to live. When I was little I had no grasp of how serious cancer was. My mom told me my dad was sick, but that was about it. I remember my mom kept insisting that I spent time with him, but I would always get angry when he got too tired to play or kicked me out so he could vomit from the chemo. I remember one night in particular where my school had my first back-to-school night carnival. They had all sorts of rides and stuff. My dad had just had extensive surgery and had staples across his entire neck. I used to joke that he was like Frankenstein. My dad managed to make it through the big presentation the teacher made to the whole class and their parents, but barely. I thought this was boring, but would be worth sitting through because I would get to go on carnival rides afterwards. But my dad had to leave. He couldn't even stand up. I could not understand how my strong 6'4" father could be so selfish. If he could sit through the boring part, why not the good part? I to this day feel tremendously guilty over how I treated him and the tantrum I threw when my mom was struggling to hold my dad up and my dad was struggling just to stay conscious. Fortunately, the doctors were wrong. He made it well past the 2 weeks and eventually beat cancer 5 years later. It took years before I understood how seriously sick he really was. He had gotten down to 90 pounds, but to me he was still a superman. Thanks for watching. What did you think of the story time? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any more story times.